Welcome, everyone. First and foremost, many of you guys have been with me before. My name is Joey Reese. I run the Practice Center, and I specifically teach mindfulness, forgiveness, and attitudinal healing work. And I do much of that funded by the state of Hawaii. And so I show up here to support Department of Human Services, Office of Youth Services, and then everyone else who this work might serve. So welcome to all of you. I stumbled into this work because it was a matter of survival for me. So it's been super helpful to have the structure of the Stand for Forgiveness Project's work. But then as I branched into kind of what this really means for me, instead of just information to have in my head, I've done additional reading and additional research and really practice in my own life. So I am not a researcher. I am not a professional in this arena, except that I'm a professional at my own life, and I've seen a lot of changes here. I think what I am is a storyteller, and what I am is a great translator. So some of this research stuff that so many of us hoard up here, I think I have something to say about how we can bring it down here. The longest journey we'll ever take, the 18 inches from our head to our hearts. Yeah, that difficult journey that I see in so many of us, I think I figured out a little piece of that. And then in sharing how I've come to be with this information, hopefully you'll take away some good ideas for you and your life. But ultimately, this is for you to figure out how this may serve you and how it may not serve you. Take with you what serves you well, leave behind anything that doesn't. Right? Don't spend a whole lot of time going, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. If it doesn't work, let it go. If it does work, then lean in. The three questions that I always ask is, what do you think about it? Do you know how you feel about it? And what are you doing or not doing? So many of us can go, oh, I think. We can spend all day there. And then few of us can go, and I feel. And then so many of us, maybe too many of us, or maybe too much of our time for many of us, we spend a lot of time going, you know what I do about it? I complain. Do you know what I do about it? Nothing. And that's kind of the story that I'm going to share with you today, because that's the story of self-forgiveness. So this self-forgiveness piece is a really integral part of the whole forgiveness process. This forgiveness process that I talk about here comes directly from the Stand for Forgiveness Project. Dr. Fred Luskin just spoke on Wednesday. Maybe you guys were there on Wednesday. So you heard him speak about unenforceable rules. So these steps have been really foundational for me to actually feel better and feel at peace. But this piece on self-forgiveness, I didn't realize how intertwined it was. And then as I started to think about, whoa, that's the last step before I get to my forgiveness story. Let me see how I'm entangled in it. And I want to tell you that one of the images that came to mind a lot through these years of working with forgiveness is this one moment where I'm about 13 or 14. You guys go back to your teen years, 13 or 14. I am Korean and Black. I was adopted into the US, to the biggest Norwegian community in the US, Spring Grove, Minnesota. Then we had moved to Des Moines, Iowa. So we were in Des Moines, Iowa at this time, where I had been told since 1979, the moment I arrived in the US, to my white parents and to the white children that they had, and then me hopping into this life in an all Norwegian community. And they told me from day one that I was just like everyone else. You're just like everyone else. You're no different than you're just like everyone else. And here I am steady trying to learn how to speak at the age of 9, but I'm just like everyone else. Here I am sticking out like a sore thumb, but I'm just like everyone else. So I'm like, okay, I'm just like everyone else. And there's this moment that I was running up the stairs. My bedroom was upstairs. I'm running up the stairs and I had this mirror by my front door. So when you come into the front door and then you turn to the left, there was a mirror there. And I was running past that to grab something. And I caught a glimpse of myself. And there was this Black girl staring. And I was like, I stopped for a second and I looked and I was like, shook, I think is the word right now, shook. Because the girl staring back at me was not like everybody else that I looked at every day, going to school, people that I looked at every day on the bus, people I looked at every day in my own family. There was this Black girl with this frizzy hair looking back at me. And I'm thinking, but these adult people in my life were telling me that I'm just like everybody else. But who I'm seeing is not like everybody else. Yeah, teen minds, still very concrete. And so I decided that there must be, or I don't know that I decided that moment, but I think it reiterated for me how wrong I was. Yeah, how wrong I am. How wrong I am. Just wanting to come out of my skin. In fact, that's the moment where I was in this biology class where we were like learning about fruit flies. Do you guys ever take that class? Genetics, fruit flies. And so I had mapped out how I could breed myself out of my future children. Like if I make sure that I marry a blonde hair, blue-eyed person, and then make sure that my kids then know that they also need to marry and have children, blonde hair, blue-eyed people, then like in 2 generations, like I can literally wipe this out. Like I remember having those thoughts, not as a bad thought. Like it was just, this past Wednesday, you guys talked about unenforceable rules. Last month, we talked about unenforceable rules. And one of the tools that I use during my classes are these violation tickets for unenforceable rules. And I have written my share of them, maybe bazillions. I don't know how many you've written, but I've written many. But the one that I thought I would share, because this is what came up for me when I was talking about self-forgiveness, is my failed protectors were my adoptive parents in this particular story, all the way from 1979 until we severed our relationship in 2016. The comment, "You're just like everybody else," when everything around me told me that they were lying, but I had to smile and pretend like they were telling me the truth and had my best interest at heart, I think really did me damage. So that is how I felt violated. I knew clearly that I was not like everyone else. And therefore, what they were telling me is, we're not going to equip you with the tools to go out and live in this racist, horrible society. Because the racist, horrible society isn't the problem. You're the problem if you can't see yourself as like everyone else. What was my expectation? We've talked about that, because it's that breakdown, right? The expectation and perceived reality that really creates that pain, or the space to create pain. And I said, well, parents should be honest. They should see the world clearly. And then they should really work really, really super hard to see reality from all perspectives, because they have multiple children. They had 4 by the time I left the house. 4. So those are 4 plus 2 parents. That's 6 different perspectives on life. Like parents, at the very least, should know that there are 6 different realities in that home. And when I really step back, I go, ooh, Joey, these are very clearly aligned with my personal values that I walk around. I value honesty a lot. How many of you guys have been in my classes and I've talked about clarity? Clarity is king. Yeah. And it's also in my expectations. So it would make sense that those are the values that I would speak on. And I talk a lot about perspectives. In fact, I've created a whole career around showing, talking about, and deciphering perspectives in order to make ourselves feel better. Okay. So where am I going with this? Revenge fantasies, we've addressed that, because as part of being heard, I had so many, some of them just actually all culminated in me. I just wanted to end it all. Like it was just too confusing and too messy. And also I wanted them to see how much pain I was in and how they were a part of me just ending my life. Those were my revenge fantasies. I also wish that the 2 of them would separate and alone separately be sent away to a place where they didn't belong, and then be told like, you're just like everybody else, and then see how they managed it, right? And then I would also just like have them be highlighted, like everybody see their bullshit. See, they're not just these good, decent Lutheran pastor people. They're full of crap. It's what I wanted people to see. But the piece of this violation tool that really matters for our talk today on self-forgiveness, it's really this piece about what retaliatory actions did I take in my life, and how do I feel about them? What did I think? How did I feel? What did I do or not do? I became small and quiet. I wanted to look and sound and be like everyone else. So that frizzy hair that I caught myself looking in the mirror is because I try to cut bangs and do those big barrel bangs, because that's what was in the 80s. That's what everybody else was doing. And if I'm like everybody else, then I should be able to have big barrel bangs like everyone else. And mine turned out like this, frizz. I could not, would not, refuse to love them. And I wanted them to know, and I would show it in my face and my contempt for them. Anybody who would listen, I talked about them. In fact, I don't know that you guys have ever heard any positive things that I had to say about my adoptive parents. And of course there are. But I think I made a point to go, I will never, ever talk well of them in public. I will always talk about them like crap. I used them for money well into my adulthood. I stole from them. I took money from them. I tried to guilt them. I definitely lied to them. And I thought, you're going to lie to me to my face. I'm going to lie to you to your face. And then we'll see how long this game goes on. And I 100% lied to myself. So when I did all the steps, I put those steps at the beginning. I put it in the beginning of all of them because I think for me, it was really important that this is not where I start. I had so much pain inside of me that needed to be heard that this wouldn't have been an appropriate place for me to start. I'm telling you the middle part of my journey, when I had some space to clearly see, oh, dang, Joey, you are not a good person. Look at you, lying, thieving, don't know yourself, talk to people about like crap, and then treat yourself like, that is not a good person. That is not a good person. But I already didn't feel like a good person. So to be told that would have been counterproductive in that moment, you know? And then I see that reiterated when I'm working with teens. I hear so many people talk to kids like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Yeah, what's wrong with you? Even though I think our intention is to correct a behavior that might get them into trouble, right? And have them behave in a way that might be more successful either at school or with their peers or with their partners, etc. But the words that we choose, I think, is powerful. What's wrong with you? Have you ever said that to yourself? Yeah, what's wrong with you? That speaks to the essence of who you are. What's wrong with me? I don't know what's wrong with me. I know that everything is wrong with me. Then what do you do? What are the chances of success in your life if everything is wrong with you, right? And what does a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, what do they say to what is wrong with you? Don't you know how to do anything right? Where do we go from there? There are folks, Brene Brown, there are folks who will talk about shame and guilt much better than I. So please go ahead and do your research. I'm just going to talk to you about how I look at this. So when I look at this list of all of the ways that just this one little violation ticket and all the ways that I just showed up like junk in my life, I feel a tremendous amount of shame. I felt shame when I saw that girl who did not look like everybody else. I felt shame for all of the ways that I behaved subsequently. I felt shame for just who I was in life. This feeling of this whole self being wrong, defective, unacceptable, unworthy, damaged goods. So when we feel this way, I mean, this is the breeding ground for how do you manage that? Well, I manage that by shutting out that voice. Manage that by, I don't know that I called it destructive behaviors, but I called that coping. Like I ate, I did not feel like if I had an inkling of a feeling, I would shove that down. The idea of grieving in front of people, oh no, not in therapy, not with trusted people. It really prevented me from building relationships because I was not going to feel, and I was not going to feel authentically. I was always going to be okay. There was a point when I had a lot of struggling with alcohol, right? Smoking way too much weed. Yeah. the rage, the hostility that I expressed to my partners, to my children. You see that second paragraph. I'm like, oh man, there was a lot of behaviors associated with that shame for behaviors that I think I was doing in order to protect myself. So people who experience traumatic events, and that's, I didn't show you the trauma talk today, right? I didn't start with this separation from a felt sense of safety, dignity, or belonging, but that trauma, that event, are also, we might feel some shame, especially if we feel like we somehow are to blame. We somehow are the one to blame. And so this forgiveness process, I think, is really helpful, or was helpful to me, and why I use during our groups. If you guys recall, some of you guys have been in group with me at week 2, when we share our grievance story, and then I ask you to stop talking. And then I ask all the rest of the participants, I'm like, do you understand the grievance story? So that we can get some nodding, because most of us understand the pain that we're experiencing. And then I ask the listeners, who is or are the villains or failed protectives in the story? And I have the other people say it, because I do notice that some of us that come in, even though they tell me a traumatic, like just a horrific story where there's a clear villain, like so-and-so did this to me. There is a group of us that really go, but you know what? If I hadn't done that, or if I wasn't there, or if I didn't experience this, then they wouldn't. So I really am the villain. So that very second week, I really want to clarify that both and is important. Yeah, there's some roles that we play, and there are some clear villains out there, so that we can kind of broaden that world. Because if it's all our fault all the time for things that was beyond my control, how can I control this? So it couldn't all be my fault. And then when there is shame, then there's these 2 ways of acting. So when I ask you the questions, what do you think? How do you feel? What do you do or not do? Some of us might not be able to answer that because we're in it. But what if I asked, how many of you guys act out? And they attribute this, when I say they, I'm talking about the researchers, all of them. So please, if that research is important, do some due diligence on your own. So some of the acting out is about hostility. They attribute that to a lot of men who feel shame. So a lot of violence, acting out against others. And they attribute a lot of acting in to women. So I don't know that there's a clear line there, because I've done a lot of acting out in my years. But acting in is that self-hatred. I hate myself. Therefore, now I'm going to try to figure out how to cope, or maybe self-destruct. So maybe I'm not going to look at there. Do I have shame in my life? For me, if I hear myself going, God, I hate myself, that's acting in. All the years of external hostility towards my kids, definitely acting out, because of all the shame that I had. This whole sense of self that was wrong, that somehow I was born out of time, out of place, like I didn't belong here. I'm just taking up air for no reason. Shame. Not a lot to do with that. So how do we let go? How do we let go of shame? I don't know that I have all the answers here, right? But it's definitely that mindful practice of sitting there and recognizing that that might be what you're feeling. It's a good start. Definitely getting some support, maybe a therapist, counselor, groups, trusted friend, those things. But figuring that out for yourself is going to be paramount. But maybe just the awareness, right? The awareness, because the piece about self-forgiveness that I love when Fred talks about is that most of us let ourselves off the hook too easily. Most of us, what we notice is this guilt thing, and not necessarily shame. So we have this guilt things like, I recognize that I've done some junky things. I recognize that I'm behaving poorly. I recognize that I'm doing XYZ that is not so good for my life, for my family, for my situation. But somehow we conflate the two. Oh, I shouldn't have shame. I was told not to have shame. So I'm just gonna let myself off the hook. I'm just gonna let it all go. I'm gonna just forgive myself and I'm just gonna start anew. Okay, so some as a mental exercise, maybe that's helpful, but here's where I'd like for us to think about recognizing that you are okay. So when we tell kids, what's wrong with you? Maybe we can remove that from our language and show them this behavior is going to get us into trouble. Okay, this behavior. So maybe we need to change that behavior. But can you tell me what you're feeling? So we need to be a little bit more nuanced in the way we talk, be more intentional in the words that we use. So intentionally, there are some things that you are doing. There are some things that I'm doing as a result of what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling that is not helpful. When I'm lying to my adoptive parents, when I'm lying to myself, when I'm stealing or manipulating money from them, yeah, those are not good behaviors. And at the end, when it's quiet and I'm going to bed, that's not something that I go, I feel good about that. No, I don't feel good about that. So that is worthy of change. That is worthy of change. So to let go of the shame piece, it ain't all about you. So your beingness is okay. So maybe figure out that your beingness is okay and some of your behavior might not be so okay. Yeah. And then shifting some of the blame and passing it around. It can't be all their fault and it can't be all your fault. There's some mix of both. Yeah. So maybe getting some clarity around those things will be helpful. So Fred's research shows 4 areas. I like to think that I'm so unique and I'm this like magical little flower walking around. Sometimes when I'm not filled with shame, I swing to the other end. I'm a purely magical, unique being, but we're not so unique. It turns out that those of us who are struggling to forgive and to let go, these are the 4 areas where we get stuck. Most of us. And then I'm looking at this list going, no, I swear to God, he made this list just for me. So just in that story, I look at that and go, you failed at a significant life task, such as finding a meaningful career. Yeah, because I didn't know myself. I was pretending to be everybody else and going to the school where they thought I should go. And then I didn't like it. And then and I was just trying to then survive and not really lean into what it is that I wanted to do. So of course I didn't find a meaningful career for forever and ever. Having a successful marriage, oh my goodness, don't you have to be you in order to get into a partnership of some sort? So yeah, I've blown up every single relationship that I've ever been in, including the marriage. Being a good daughter or son, well, we can chuck that out the window because I just told you how sucky I was at that. And then being a parent, that's just the other end. I was not a very good parent because 1, I did not know myself. 2, I was acting out a lot in the comfort and safety of my own home. So yeah, significantly failed at number 1 for sure. You've hurt someone else because of your actions. Well, I just told you I hurt my kids and my partners and probably so many of my friends that I've just noped out of there. When I was moving to Hawaii in 2005, I had, people in my life that I still have in my life that I called family. But when I came back for a visit, one of them told me, they said, when you were moving, you kept saying you're moving because you don't have anybody here. You don't have anybody here. And she's like, but we're your family. We were here. Like, I was just like saying things that just because I was in pain. And I'm sitting here hurting people who are there for me, showing up for me. So I very clearly have hurt people known and unknown. You've hurt yourself by engaging in self-destructive behaviors. I went on and on about that. Violence against self, alcoholism, drug abuse, or any other addiction. You didn't do something you thought was important to you. Oh, I have endless lists of things that I think are important to me that I have failed on. Endless lists. So the question is, do you see yourself in any of these categories? Do you have a story attached to those? Well, then if you've answered yes, then welcome, you're in good company, because this is where most of us fall down. Most of us see ourselves here. So then the answer, when we can answer this question, is that when we observe that we too have played a role in our grievance story as an additional villain, so not the only villain, as an additional villain, Often it is accompanied with self-sabotaging or self-limiting thoughts, beliefs. It really inhibits our ability to heal, restore ourselves to wholeness. So the question is, when you notice that you failed at those tasks, what do you hear yourself saying? What do you feel yourself doing? How do you feel? Because those self-attacks, those things that are in my, so for me, I was just always worthless and stupid. Those are the two words. And you know what, I laugh now because that is definitely not how I would describe myself now. Like stupid is not one of the words, but I felt stupid most of my life growing up. And part of it is because of the language barrier. Part of it is that I had to learn English late, and that makes you feel stupid when all of your counterparts are speaking like it's no big deal. And I was getting made fun of for words that I couldn't quite figure out how to conjugate properly. Yeah, so I felt stupid for a lot, and that just stayed with me. I didn't evolve, it just stayed with me. So I heard myself calling myself stupid and worthless a lot. So how do you move through life when those words are there? So the question is, do you have any self-attacking thoughts like that you are aware of? Not that you need to say them out loud here for sure, but it's like, do you know you? That's the question. Do you know you? Because if we can't identify those in order for us to embrace it or to let it go or to dissolve, then it's just there kind of playing itself like the soundtrack in our lives. Do you have here, feel self-attacking thoughts specific to your grievance story? I had, oh my gosh, around race and like my belonging, my sense of dignity. Boy, some of the words that I used to call myself around that, it was worse than anything that anybody has told me externally. So then, when we know, and when we can admit, and when we can see our own role and what we might have fallen down on in terms of taking care of our life, then that's the crossroads that we can really look at and then choose to go a different way. But it's hard to do that if there isn't clarity around what is it that you're trying to actually fix. For a long time, I was also trying to fix the things that other people told me was wrong with me. That's not helpful. What's helpful is to figure out, what do I have healthy guilt around? What is it that I have done or not done that really is not adding up to the life I say that I want? I wanted a close relationship with my children. Well, when I'm being hostile and yelling and cussing, that's really difficult to do. I said I wanted to love myself and show myself a sense of belonging. But when I'm drinking and eating and can't move and can't get up, and at the age of 40, I'm already having knee ache, back aches, acid reflux, can't even sleep because of the way that I've treated this body, that's really difficult to then say, I love myself. So those behaviors that I was doing, the things that I was doing to cope versus live, I had to really identify what those were. So for me, it was, you need to figure out what love looks like for you, because it starts with me first. So easy as a mom, I think, immediately to go, oh, what do I need to give to my kids? And then I could actually use that as fodder. Do you know what I gave up for you? Do you know what I have done and not done because of you? Like, they didn't ask for that. Right? But it's so easy for me to go, but let me skip over myself and play the martyr role. Of course, I wasn't saying that out loud because I wasn't clear, but let me play the martyr role of showing up for everyone else and not me. And then like expect that they will show up for me or do for me that which I couldn't do for myself. So it's really important to start off with ourselves. All you parents out there, all you caretakers out there, all of you who have a caseload like neck deep out there, who tell me that you can't think about yourself because of those things. Those things will not get taken care of in the way that they need to if we cannot take care of ourselves. So the self-forgiveness piece really is about the self. What have you fallen down on the job around yourself? So in these moments that I really got myself into trouble, and the moments where I'm like, oh God, this grievance story, that grievance story. So all of my worthlessness were just like, I don't deserve happiness. I don't deserve love. I don't deserve anything, is how I walked around life, which is how I just fell head first into the most violent relationship of my life, where, you know, when I look at statistics and I'm reading, and for some reason, most recently, a lot of this has come up for me. I'm like, oh my God, I made it out alive. I made out of it alive. But I'm really curious about how did I, this very smart person, get myself in? So there's a moment that I always think about where I could have gotten out. I had this moment of awareness that said, Joey, don't get in here. This is the wrong thing to do. And yet I didn't get out. I stayed. That led to physical violence, my child being born out of physical violence, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, all of the abuse. And I kept going back to that moment going, well, you deserve it because you knew at that moment that you should have gotten out and you stayed in. So there, that's why you're stupid and you're worthless. You deserve it. And then here I am talking about blue heart. Now let's talk about positive intentions. There's such a way that it can be like a throwaway. Yeah. Such an easy, like throwaway thing, positive intention. But this is how it like absolutely changed everything for me, is that I went back to that moment when I could have gotten out and I didn't. And I hear myself all the way into even today. There are moments when I catch myself talking to myself poorly around that. Catch myself going, you stupid, worthless, no wonder, I say. And I think about that girl and ask, what was her positive intention? Why did she stay? Like, let's just take away that she was stupid and worthless. Like, why would anyone stay? Why would Joey stay? Why did you stay, Joey? And for a while, it's important to know that, like, we're not answer machines. I think the question is important. To be curious, to go, what is the thing that motivates you? And I'm looking at your names right now because all of you, it would be different than mine, yeah? The positive intention that was noble and good. The positive intention that was noble and good. Just before everything hit the fan. It's really important to identify that. Because it can't be that I'm just walking around as a stupid girl, that I'm walking around as a worthless person. What was my motivation that's noble and good? What are some of your motivations that are noble and good that drive you to do what you do? What are some of the motivations that are noble and good that drive your clients to do what they do? What are the motivations that are noble and good that drive your kids, your students to do what they do? I mean, I look at teens and they get into a lot of fights. And you say, why are you getting in a fight? You're going to get expelled again. And then hands down, the number one thing that they tell me is that they want respect, or they were protecting their friend or family. And then I look at it and go, oh my God, that's awesome. To protect your friends and to protect yourself and to protect your family, that's amazing. That's an amazing motivation that's noble and good, that drove your behavior. Boy, you guys, what a different world we would have if we can talk to ourselves and our kids like that. You wanted to protect your friends? You wanted to protect your family? You wanted to protect your honor? That is a motivation that is noble and good, that drove your behavior. That's amazing. Now, what you did is junk, and we got to figure out how we can redo some of those things, right? So if you really, truly want to protect, then here are some things that we can maybe do. See the difference? But instead, we bypass that motivation that's noble and good. Why did you get in that fight? How dare you? What's wrong with you? I've told you 100 times. And then we expel them, we suspend them, we send them here, we send them there. What are they learning? They're going to learn how to get away with it better the next time, right? They're going to learn how to keep that inside, because that motivation is noble and good. How many things do we do for love? And would we consider love a motivation that's noble and good? I mean, we have stories about people killing one another for love. Now, I'm not condoning killing, you guys, but I am here to point out that love is a powerful motivator. It's a motivation that's noble and good. That positive intention is noble and good that drove that behavior. And I'm not saying the behavior is good. We need to be able to be clearly able to separate those two. What are some other positive intentions that are noble and good that drive your students, your clients, yourself, your parents, your kids? What motivations do you see out there in the world? I'd love for you guys to pop them in the chat. Thinking about motivations that are noble and good that you see around there. And really full stop. So we're not going to be leaning into the behaviors quite yet. Motivations that you see out there in the world that's noble and good, that drive people's behavior. Ooh, I love this. Okay. To have fun, to be seen, to be heard, to belong, to feel safe, fighting injustice, wanting to fit in, making others feel good, seen, heard, to belong, wanting world peace, yes, taking care of others, acceptance, respect. You guys, these motivations are so powerful. The desire to help people in need, making them feel better, to be a good provider. Oh my gosh, you guys. Now, when you look at the chat list, look at some of these motivations, and then look at some of the junk behaviors that have been attached to that. How many ways have we gone wrong trying to provide for our families? I mean, not just little kind of thieving, but to like mass espionage, trying to get the biggest and the best thing for their families. We've seen people like literally steal whole communities. Doesn't change the fact that wanting to be a good provider is a motivation that is noble and good. I think we as humans, we really want to get into this binary way of thinking, good, bad, period. Yeah. Gosh, only if it was that simple. It ain't that simple. There are motivations that are noble and good, and then there are some people who do not have the skills in order to execute that well. I wanted to belong. I wanted a family, and I wanted to feel love. I didn't know how to get that because I lived in an orphanage, and I lived with people that really didn't want children, but thought it was a good idea to have children. It satisfied a lot of their needs. All Lutheran pastors were doing it. They were all adopting kids from Korea. In fact, if you are a Lutheran pastor, I bet you know other Lutheran pastors who have adopted Korean kids. It's just what was happening at the time. So for me, the idea of belonging and love and family, it was askew. I didn't have any models that I could go after. And then I wasn't even myself. I didn't know any of those answers. So my motivation, my positive intention for myself is, how do I restore myself to wholeness if I don't belong? And I was out there flying and flitting and floating on my own. And when this man showed up and was just like, look, I love you. We're going to have a family. No one's going to love you like I love you. I really wanted to believe him. So that motivations that noble and good sometimes gets just conflated with the behaviors then that come after it. So we include that big old but. I wanted love, but see what happens when you give into love? Then nobody treats you right and blah, blah, blah. See what happens when that's what we end up saying, forgetting that we didn't execute well. So it's important to get clarity around what your motivation is in the grievance story. So not just generally, perhaps generally, but I told you a very specific story. And then I saw a through line going, I wonder why that happened. What was my motivation? What was my intention? What did I need to fill my soul? Not my pocketbook, not my lifestyle, not my disease, not my ability to cope better, but what was the motivation that would fulfill this desire to be loved? Yeah, and it was belonging, and it was family, and it was love. So now I can go back and go, okay, so that Joey that didn't get out of the car, instead of her being stupid and weak and worthless, I can now look at her and go, she wanted love. She wanted to belong, and she wanted a family that was close, that loved her, that she could love. Yeah. there's some actions that I can take on that. When I'm stupid and worthless, that's shame. There's not a lot that I can do with that. When I'm willing to let that go and go, but yeah, the choices that you made as a result of what you wanted, those weren't so great, but I can make some decisions around that today. No, I'm not saying go back in time and undo and redo and all of that. I'm saying today, because that motivation is still true today. That motivation that you had, the positive intention that you had, that you will find from your stories, that comes from when you're 10, when it comes from when you were 5, that comes from when you were 25, all of those, that motivation, I'm going to guess, and I'm going to actually even bet you that some of that you still carry today. Because the human desire to connect, those are pretty simple. That list is pretty simple. Most of us want love and belonging and to be seen and to be heard. Most of us want that. So that willingness to really look in and go, what did your heart, what was the positive intention in your heart? Steps to self-forgiveness really starts here, is your willingness to identify. And it's easiest for me when I go back to what are the self-attacks that I hear? Okay, that weren't true because that's really shame-based. What was my motivation? The positive intention is the personal motivation that was noble and good, that drove your behavior just before getting hurt. And when we find that positive intention, we've located the good part, right? Even if the situation ended badly, even if we've suffered, even if we continue to suffer now, it's really important to isolate that positive intention. Because when we locate that goodness, when I say, Joey that I used to yell at all the time, who is also me, right? She wanted to belong and she wanted love. It's like anytime I say that, I go, oh, yeah. In a way that feels different when I call myself stupid and worthless. Yeah. So, I mean, that feels elementary, but it feels different to actually practice that in your being. This is the point where we can really start to let go of our anger and self-loathing and this ability to soften up on ourselves. That's how we then show up softened for others, or ability to be more compassionate with others. It's hard to give that which we do not have. Yeah. So this desire to create this loving family, that was really difficult for me to execute if I didn't have that for myself. So it made sense to me that I continue to perpetuate this horrible, terrible, terrible feeling. So the idea of being able to isolate and locate that part of you that drives your motivation in your life, and then to clearly look at the behaviors that come out of it, because it's important to go, what do I think about this? How do I feel about it? What am I doing or not doing? So much of self-resentment gets built up, and it's hard to manage if we just keep it in thought and feel. To release self-resentment, it comes through action. It comes through behavior. It comes through the doing. So for me to go, okay, I'm going to start thinking about myself better, and I'm going to really meditate on feeling good, wasn't enough. It's not enough. I have to get up off of my butt and actually do things. And that might mean actually making amends, saying and behaving differently around the people in my life, right? It's actually getting up and exercising if I didn't want this body to be broken down. It's actually taking steps to change the way I eat if it's this vessel was giving me so much problems. It means that I had to actually be vulnerable in order to make friends. Guys, it's just such a weird concept for me to think about, like, how do you make friends as an adult? I'm much better at it now than I was in my 40s. I think I was better in my 40s than I was in my 30s. But this idea of how do you become a good friend? Because I don't even like myself. How do you even get others to like you if you don't even like yourself? Was the question that I would ask. I think it was so quiet, I didn't even hear myself asking that for a long time. But that behavior then it's easy to then fall into go, but I'm really an introvert. I really don't like people. So that's why. That was my excuse. That was an excuse for a lot. So I would do things like this, present, and then like, oh, I don't want to go out and like really become vulnerable. In fact, even to this day, the number one complaint that I get among close friends or around like intimate circles is that I don't show enough emotion. Even now. You guys, I was acculturated as a Korean kid, a Black Korean kid in Korea in the 70s. That means I had zero permission to cry, ever. Zero permission to cry. I would, in fact, get my ass beat, not just tapped. This was back in the corporal punishment days. I would get beat if I cried in front of people. Yeah. So even to this day, for me to just emote when it's not in the context of learning or education, just to emote around my own story in a way that says, oh, take care of me. It's, oh my gosh, you guys, it's like pulling teeth. I'd rather you just pull my teeth out. I'd rather you do that. There's a lot of resistance for me to emote around that. To show that kind of vulnerability is going to take, I don't know how many years of practice, but even my willingness, it's like my ducks don't work. My kids have complained about it. My siblings have complained. Everybody has complained about it. Yeah. And some of you guys who have seen me like emote in this context find that hard to believe. But you know the difference, right? I can feel for you around your story because I'm an empathetic person. But this is about my own healing, about my own vulnerability. I will not get into a group and cry around my own story. It takes a lot for me to do that. I feel shame still around that. I hear the voices, and it's weird because I hear that it's in Korean, right? Because it's my mother's voice, and I don't speak Korean now, so it gets lost in translation. But the feeling is that's no go, don't do it. So that shame associated with emoting is still in me. So this is not a one and done. Like knowing the concepts of let go of shame, but lean into that healthy guilt, because there are some behaviors you guys are exhibiting in your life that are not helpful, not to you, not to the people around you. And so you can probably start making some lists of actual behavioral changes that you might want to do, rooted in your positive intention. Right. So when I go, okay, I want to belong, but the people closest to me who say that they need me to emote more. Oh my God. Oh, but I have to still contend with that feeling of shame that comes up, because that's what I was told forever and ever in the time period that was important to me. We got a lot of our messaging when we were young, right? So to all of a sudden expect that we're gonna turn it off or turn it on or be different, you know, overnight, that in itself might be harmful. So what I do with that is, yeah, I own up to that. Yeah, I probably am not going to cry. I'm not going to probably emote around this. Probably going to be, I'm probably not going to tell you things from my own life unless it's in the context of this or somebody specifically asks me. And even when people specifically ask me, I actually have words that says, no, I don't feel like telling you that. I don't want to tell you that. And I probably need to practice more of yes, but I'm not there now. I'm not there now. And I just try and not to let that get into that big snowball of shame things, shame stories that I might hold. So for you, I think it's really important to really learn what your patterns are, what your values are, what stories you're telling yourself, what self-attacks that you hear, and what level of softness you might have for yourself. And while you're learning yourself, above all else, to practice self-compassion and some kindness, to be willing to be clear, and some things like, you know, writing it out, joining a group, therapy, those are going to be all important and ongoing. So if you've done it once, great, maybe do it again. Yeah, that might be really helpful. But that ability to cultivate some stillness, and Fred talks about that as being the most important thing, right? And he uses the term positive emotional refocusing technique. When you're working with me, you hear the words mindfulness, Mindfulness is about being present in this moment, no matter what, with acceptance. And for a lot of you, you might be really, really brand new to this conversation. That's okay. Some of you guys might be like scholars around this conversation and yet don't practice. That's okay. Like to be really in this moment, no matter what, with acceptance. I think that's foundationally our practice. Because more shame or more shooting on yourself at this moment will not be helpful. Hands down, across the board, that will not be helpful. So to be present in this moment, no matter what, with acceptance, and the no matter what is when the harsh feelings come up, the no matter what is when you see the areas where we should have done better, and to let that go. To go, maybe I should have, but I didn't. How do I feel about that? And then when I've created some of that space, then we can ask the question, now what do I want to do about that? So when I flitting and floated off to Jamaica, trying to find myself, trying to be around brown people, I stole money, skipped out of school, unenrolled. I noped myself out of there, came back to the US with a brand new baby, uneducated, a Black woman. I had all of the makings of that. So there was a moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm so feeling so shameful. But I looked at this baby and I was like, okay, you're going to need more from me probably. So I did use him as the motivator for me to get my butt back in school. And in fact, I just reconnected with one of my friends from when I was 25, trying to get myself back in school. And he remembers my son because I used to bring him into class and he'd sit on a little rug while I'm sitting here doing work, right? Back in the day when I guess I could bring a baby to class. Yeah. But that was much harder than going to school as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, partying it up. Now but that action of doing the thing that I thought was important, that I noped out of there, was really integral to kind of starting this path of what do I want? Who am I? How do I want to show up? So the self-forgiveness is not just a concept up here. Oh, just let yourself off the hook. Oh, you didn't know better. Oh, when you know better, you'll do better. That might be okay, but really it has to be tied to action. What are you trying to forgive yourself for? What do you think about that? How do you feel about that? What have you done or haven't you done? What can you do? So then when we start writing the forgiveness story is very concrete. It starts with that foundation of the positive intention, that motivation that was noble and good that drove your behavior. And then the goals that are inherent in that. There are specific goals, you guys, that are inherent in our positive intention. So let's look at that kid who fights to protect his friends, right? So instead of saying, don't fight, if we take that moment and go, your motivation to protect yourself and your friend are so good. Can you tell me what happened? Then you'll have more details, right? And then you might be able to brainstorm ways that they can actually protect. What does protection mean to them? What does protection mean to you? How can you help this child person? That's what 16, 17, 18-year-olds are. They're children. Yeah. How can we help this child person like build habits, build behaviors that can support that positive intention? Look at in all the different ways that we try to seek love. And then we'll whittle it down to, I mean, the messaging that we give our girls is just so horrific. And, doing sex education work for teens, don't spread your legs is what we tell them. Oh, like that's just that doesn't do anything for anybody. Just crass for crass sake. But you're trying to get love. You want to be seen. Gosh, that's a great motivation. And in fact, that's so normal. All of us want to be seen. All of us want to be loved. Like, I wonder what ways that we can help you be seen and feel loved. That's the conversation I wish I had had. That's the conversation that we can have with ourselves and with our kids. So before you guys leave in the next 4 minutes, I'd love for you to think about, one, yourself. What motivation have you like bypassed and skipped and went straight to like chastising your behavior? Can you walk that back and look at your motivation and honor that? Some of you guys have already put it in the chats. And then what can you do? What actions can you take? What self-care behaviors can you implement that'll get that intention met? And then if you're here like, but I'm here for work, then the same goes for work. In what ways have you made, I mean, I'm definitely have said this to my clients, right? Shame them for their behaviors. Don't do that. How many times have we? Now I'm going to have to write, ugh, right? But instead, how can we lean in to the motivation that is noble and good, that they might be walking into your cubicle, your office, your space, your Zoom call with? And how can we support them to get that met? Not only will that bring you closer to yourself because you'll be like, oh, look at that, I connected, right? But you will actually be connecting with somebody else. That connection is what the World Health Organization says will decrease suicide rates. I mean, it's just very simple. I mean, not to get hyperbolic, but this is literally about saving lives. Yeah, our own and each other's. So in what ways can you show up for yourself? And in what ways can you show up for others? And now I want to circle back to the question that Sarah had put in the chat, which is like, oh God, you guys have endless amounts of ways that guilt is put on you nowadays in the way that you live, right? The plastics, what you eat, factory farming, climate change. How do you deal with that? The question is, do you feel shame around it? Do you feel shame? Do you feel like a worthless person because you bought a bottle of water? And how helpful is that? So that probably is a bigger conversation. It's not about the bottle of water. That shame is coming from other arenas. Talked about that today. So to really figure out what it means to let that go. And some of that might be, you're not that important. It's not just you. You're a collection of many, right? One. But that guilt piece is that plan better. If you don't want to buy plastic water bottled water, because that makes you feel guilty, recognize that guilt. You don't get to put yourself off the hook. If that's something that comes up for you, then plan better. Pack your water. Or when I go on a 3-mile walk and people are like packed in with all kinds of water things, I'm like, I remember hiking when I was this big and nobody cared around water. Like, you will be okay. You will be okay. Okay. I mean, we have so much access to clean water as us, as these people. Parts of the world, this is not the case. But for most of us in here, that is the case. That you can probably walk into any place and go, hey, can I get a glass of water? And somebody will give you a clean glass of water, right? If you have problems with factory farming, then stop eating factory farming stuff. Like, if that's truly a guilt piece, then the behavior change is what's needed in order to let that go. Okay? But first and foremost, it's really about identifying and really being clear, what is your issue? You can't solve all of the world problems, but you can tackle the ones that come to mind on a regular basis. So self-forgiveness is a really integral part of the whole forgiveness journey. Please remember to be really self-compassionate, kind with yourself, be gentle as you continue to do the work. Continue to do the work of making behavioral changes that are rooted in your positive intention. I appreciate your hour so much. I appreciate it. At the end of the month, we'll be back together for attitudinal healing and another forgiveness process. I hope to see you guys again. This video will be up, but I invite you to join me with a small group or any of the other sessions. thepracticecenter.org is where the information is, or on Facebook. You can find information about me and what we're doing. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a beautiful Friday. Aloha Friday. Have a beautiful weekend. Hope to see you at the end of the month. Thank you. Seek community.